Alien Earth Episode 4 is here, and with it being titled Observation, we saw multiple observations taking place, obviously. Whether it be Kirsch observing slightly from afar and being one step ahead of the plan that Morrow was feeding him, Wendy being observed by the likes of Arthur and Cavalier, the species being analysed and tested on, or even Wendy observing the chest burster when it leaped out of Joe's lung, with the episode continuing to focus on what makes something or somebody human and the dynamic difference in the way that these hybrids are treated. Let's jump into this episode and break down all the important details. Here is Alien Earth Episode 4 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Slightly. First of all, I want to start off by talking about Slightly because I found his journey in this episode to arguably be the most interesting. Morrow was speaking with him and manipulating him into getting one of the Xenomorph's eggs so that it could be returned to Yutani, and by speaking to him in the way that he did and making out like he was his friend, he agreed to go along with it. What I found particularly interesting was the dynamic difference between Slightly and Morrow, and also Slightly and Kirsch. On one hand, Morrow was able to tap into Slightly and get him on side by manipulating him, talking to him like he was a child and acting like this authoritative figure, which is what we saw work with him. But then, on the other hand, there was Kirsch, who was talking to Slightly as if he was an adult and the age of his synthetic body, which wasn't working as well as how Morrow was speaking to him. Morrow was still talking to him like he was human and at the age that he remembered, whereas Kirsch was speaking to him as if he was a machine of some kind. Morrow acted as if he cared about Slightly by wanting to know his real name from when he was the sick child, and by finding out that his name was Arush Singh. Morrow was then able to locate his family, and Morrow used that as leverage over Slightly in order to make him get the eggs, ultimately making him pick the side of the enemy and not his friends, which is the opposite to what Slightly said he'd do when he spoke with Kirsch in his room. Slightly's been tasked with getting a human to walk past an egg so that it responds to them, and I can't help but feel like it's going to be Joe. Slightly was frustrated that he was able to be there alongside Wendy when nobody else was allowed to have their family there, and with him being the human that he'll probably be able to get into the lab the easiest, I reckon it could well end up being him, but I don't think it's going to go to plan at all. That 80s style fade between them both showed that it's definitely on the horizon. This was the first sign of division in the Lost Boys from this episode, but there were also plenty of other moments that showed that division was forming too. Kirsch is obviously aware of the conversations that Slightly is having with Morrow, hence why these tests and questions are being thrown in Slightly's way, so I think we'll soon see Kirsch intervene. Cavalier and Kirsch. I still think that Kirsch is gunning for that top position. One of the first interactions between Kirsch and Cavalier in this episode was Cavalier telling Kirsch to basically get back to work and focus on the creatures, rather than Wendy. So to me, it showed a complete lack of regard for him. And then when Species 64 took over the sheep that was in the cage, the species was looking at Kirsch as if he was the boss. And it took Cavalier throwing the ball at the wall to get its attention and him pointing at himself to basically imply that it was him who was the boss. They both stood on opposite sides of the cage, which to me showed the opposition to each other, and the look on Cavalier's face when he wasn't getting the attention showed that he was furious at being undermined by even a creature that he didn't know anything about. The creature was said to be extremely intelligent and to have a far higher brain function than what the sheep originally had. The fact that it tried to get up onto 2 legs to walk, and also the way that it was just standing still, staring outside of the glass, showed that there were thoughts that were going round in its mind and that it was frustrated. Cavalier said things like, "It's my world and he lives in it," and the sheer excitement when he saw Species 64 take over the sheep. It just made me think of how that was literally what he was doing to the children that were sick. When Wendy first awoke and her sound hearing was turned right down, Cavalier said to Dame Sylvia, "You're not her mother, it's an IT issue," which again showed how he viewed the hybrids. He didn't view them as human in the slightest, despite them having their human minds inside of the synthetic shell. There was also another focus in this episode on hybrids not being human too, when Joe said she's still a human being, and he was met with the response, "No, she's not." Plus, also when he asked, "Did you download my sister's conscience onto that body? Is it her?" And the answer he received was they're two different questions. The whole idea of what makes a person, or even if they're still their former selves, is a real moral discussion within this episode. And when you tie it back to the first episode, when we were shown how the three different species were battling for superiority and to be the sole surviving one, it becomes even more present and debatable. I'm of the mindset that Wendy is still the person that she was before because the mind that was once within her body as Marcy is now in a completely different shell, so she's got the same mindset, sense of humor, and memories. It's just the physical essence of her that's changed. Cavalier referring to her as an IT issue shows that he just doesn't think the same as that in the slightest. One thing that I also thought was quite interesting but also frightening was the control that the team had over Wendy. They were able to turn her hearing down completely, so she heard nothing. And whilst it served its purpose well in this episode, I think we could potentially see the whole playing God element being present and that look to have total control. I think we could maybe even see some of the hybrids being rendered blind or deaf if they get to a point where they're struggling to be controlled. Wendy. When it came to Wendy in this episode, we found out a little bit more about her being able to hear the Xenomorph's language and the fact that they were communicating. We still don't know if they were communicating with her or if they were communicating with each other and she was just able to tap into the frequencies, as we did find out that they speak on multiple different frequencies. Wendy said that the baby was screaming when Cavalier asked what it was that she could hear. And when Arthur went to change something in her system so she'd no longer hear it, she said how she wanted to continue hearing it. This was probably the most synthetic that we'd seen Wendy in the show so far, as she mimicked the language of the creatures, because she was told that her voice wasn't just a voice, but it was a sound box, and the sound was in her mainframe, so she was able to replicate the language that the creatures were speaking in. The whole focus on if she was selected by the species was brought into light, and there are theories about her potentially being the new alien queen that have been floating around, but right now it's difficult to tell, as she can't even understand the language. Cavalier tasked her with trying to understand it, as all she can do is feel it right now. One giveaway that she could have been selected is that when the chest burster came out of the lung, it didn't try to attack her or anything like that, which it naturally wouldn't because of what she is, but it seemed to show a sense of affection and intrigue. I could see this going very wrong. Wendy is going to have this creature on her side and it could well show loyalty to her. Or who knows, it might well even be manipulating her. So when the likes of Cavalier tries to wave his authority around, it could take a turn for the worse if Wendy is pushed into a situation that she doesn't want to be in. This alien could be loyal to Wendy, which would prove to be an issue for everybody inside of Prodigy HQ. Also, Curly being utterly jealous of Wendy because she couldn't hear the frequency when Cavalier asked if she could hear anything is something that's worth noting. Division is forming amongst the Lost Boys faster than I ever thought it would, and she's just one small part of that. Nibs. Another threat and a large part of the Lost Boys breaking away was Nibs. In the previous episode, we saw that she was questioning her identity and what she now was. And in this episode, she came out and said that she was pregnant to Dame Sylvia, even though it was impossible for her to be. The way I'd describe Nibs is that it's almost as if her synthetic body is rejecting the mind that's been put inside of her, and we're watching her not quite knowing how to deal with what's going on. Nibs was asked by Dame Sylvia about biology, something that she didn't have anything to do with anymore because she wasn't human. And when Dame Sylvia also went to tell Nibs about her new body, she lashed out and we saw her being violent for the first time. Dame Sylvia continued to push when it came to why Nibs was acting the way that she was and how it could have been connected to what she saw with Species 64. And with Nibs not wanting to talk about it, she lashed out at Sylvia and had her round the throat, showing signs of true aggression and like she was a real threat towards her. Nibs is the most hostile of the group, and I think we're seeing some kind of PTSD that's present within her, which is why she was so reluctant to talk about what happened when she was on the ship. What I like about this is that it's a human thing to have, but we're obviously seeing these synths being treated like they're pieces of IT. So the moral inquiry of what they actually are and the fine line is something that just constantly gets pushed in our direction. Nibs is definitely going to go rogue, there's no denying that. She's going to be a threat to everybody within HQ just as much as the Xenomorph will be. With her also being secured in her room without the possibility of leaving, it's just going to make her mind even worse and fill her with rage even more. My review of the episode. I thought this was a solid episode of the show. I thought the second half of it just absolutely flew by. That was when the real development started being made, and I think I was just totally and utterly immersed within it. I know I shouldn't find it cute, but there was a cuteness to the chestburster, and seeing it being so docile, calm, and almost like it wanted to be petted. Knowing what it eventually becomes is a fast reality check, but seeing the way that Wendy and it interacted with each other really does make me think that there's a darkness on the horizon there, especially if something happens to her brother. After 3 really eventful and action-filled episodes with the Xenomorph and it feeling like there were threats around every corner, this one kinda took a step back from that and was more so focused on leveling the story out a bit. We had an equal amount of screen time distribution, and I thought that worked really well. The core question at the heart of this series is basically, is the life of the hybrid as valid as a human? They're obviously expensive, so they're valuable in that sense, but are they humans at their core, especially if they've got a human mind? It's a question that's extremely thought-provoking, and I enjoy seeing it littered throughout conversations. Whether it be wanting to choose their own names, wanting to see their families, or being offended when being called a machine. It feels like the Lost Boys are going to implode, and I'm looking forward to having a front row seat to it. When it comes to the performances of the Lost Boys, I think they're actually the strongest performances in the show. The contrast in how they look and how they act is incredible to watch because you find yourself forgetting that they have the minds of children when they had the physicality of adults when not uttering a word. It's really impressive. The next episode looks like it's gonna be a flashback episode to when Morrow and his crew were on their mission, and after watching the trailer, I think it has the potential to be one of the best episodes in the season so far. So I'm holding out for that one. So, there you have it, Alien Earth Episode 4